Good. So yeah, very warm welcome. Thank you, Kamasuri, for a warm start. Yeah, very warm welcome. It's really nice to see so many people here. We've got a pretty packed shrine room, and lovely to see some friends online as well. And yeah, it's quite a significant evening tonight for me. Don't know about you guys, but for me it's kind of significant. And it's also just a total, well, it's as an honor really to be sort of introducing, interviewing my friend Satyadasa. We've known each other for how long? For about a year now, maybe?
About a year.
I first sort of properly spoke to Satyadasa when I also interviewed him for the Buddhist Center Online. That was another book launch earlier in the year. But I must confess, I knew of you quite a long time before actually encountering the book, because my friend Ari Vachin told me that there was an order member who was also born with one hand. Not long after I started coming along, actually, and I was just like, cool. You know, why does that matter? You know, and I mention this because there's a funny thread in the book, which is near the beginning, actually. I know you're going to read a bit of the book at the start of the book in a minute, but I mention this because there's a funny thread in the book that talks about encountering other people with congenital birth defects. It's the fancy, as you say, the fancy word for we don't know. When we've encountered other people in like day-to-day life, we've often avoided them. And it's a funny thing that happens. I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but there's a young girl at Broadway who has almost exactly the same arm as me. And every time I go in there, she's often working. And we both are obviously avoiding each other. One of these days, I'm just going to try and break the tension or something. But it's obviously just like, it's just a weird thing that happens, though. You seem to just not want to be identified with a perceived weakness in some ways. Obviously, we can unpack that, or what is a perceived weakness, but there's something around that, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about. But I'm wondering, actually, I will also say that this all came about, the Buddhist Center Online interview came about for a mutual friend, Kashantakara, who was another person that also told me about the book after Ari Vachin as well. I still didn't read it. And then it took about 3 more people to recommend the book to me. And it happened that there were about 5 people on a Padmaloka retreat that I was on who were all reading it. And I thought, okay, I'll read it. And it's been a bit of I don't know, I hope it doesn't sound sort of dramatic, but it has been quite sort of a life-changing book, really. I sort of wanted just to start with this a little bit because I think it's sort of the mysteries of Sangha. So this book sort of came along, or at least it was published anyway, right when I was sort of beginning to really turn towards, I'd been practicing for a couple of years, I'd hit some walls, and long story short, it sort of was around my relationship with my body. And I was really sort of turning towards those things. It was quite painful and very difficult, as it is for anyone turning towards sort of bits of their life that they've just not really wanted to confront or anything. And lo and behold, as I'm sort of well in that journey after, this book comes along. And then it sort of kick-started this whole thing where, now I've met you and I consider you a friend, and I've met your family, and in the madness of Buddhafield, and you're wonderful. We're having a lovely conversation about your son, Thomas, who was, I think, was deep in an imaginative game of shooting something in Buddhafield. I don't know who it was. There wasn't any enemies there, I know that much. But I think there's something in the wonders of Sangha in that. And also there's something around Kalyana Mitrata, people talking about their lives, sharing in their experience. And that has really benefited me. So I really want to rejoice in you for that, for sort of sharing in your life. Like, it's a big tradition that we have here in Triratna of sharing, of life stories really, and sharing in our lives. And so I wanted to sort of start with a kind of thank you. I still haven't quite processed the book yet. I know we're going to read the first chapter, which immediately was quite striking. So I wonder if I don't know if you want to say something.
Thank you very much, Zac. And it's a particular delight for me to be here with you. I mean, we've only met in person once, haven't we? So it's really fantastic. And there's so much in what you've said already. I'm going to just read the beginning bit. And when I was writing a book, so this is a memoir, just in case you haven't got that yet. And we have a tradition in our community of telling life stories, you know, so it's a really wonderful thing to listen to other people's life stories and to tell your life story for an extended period, for an hour and a half, for 2 hours. And in a way, this is a sort of an extension of that. And when I first wrote it, though, I came up with a draft, and it was full of a lot of my ideas and opinions and thoughts about the world. But it was rather boring. There was a smattering of my sort of life story in there as well, and, you know, a few sort of anecdotes that I found particularly amusing. But I had to write it again and again, and what, you know, I wrote about my hand, and when I first told my life story in a community, I spoke about it for about 30 seconds. You know, in the context of an hour, I said, yeah, you know, it's a thing, but it didn't really affect me, and it's fine, you know, and moved on. But slowly, as I was writing this book, which I wrote over quite a number of years, I had to start really getting down to that story and trying to tell a personal story, which I've tried to do. So here we go. Something was missing from the start. Dad bumped into another expectant father in the hospital corridor. "What news?" said the man. "We have a lovely baby boy," Dad replied, but the midwife had introduced me to the world by thrusting my arm in front of Mum's face, but he's not got his left hand. The man had some whiskey and poured them both a glass. Everyone was doing their bit. Dad's father, a farmer, broke from his rounds on the farm to shout some words down the phone to his son. "Never mind, we'll love him twice as much." 10 years earlier, the drug thalidomide had caused multiple limb deficiencies in thousands of children. So while Mum was sedated, I was examined for ailments more sinister than an absent hand. Every blemish was a harbinger of possible problems ahead. Mum's parents, Grandpa and Nana, were only allowed a quick look in. As they sat in the waiting room, a poem came to Grandpa, which he wrote up on a nurse's attendance sheet. His small grey face, but 12 hours here, bears mysteries stranger than the seas, in hieroglyphics more austere, and older far than Ramesses. Setting events against a mythological backdrop would surely help. After 9 days, the doctors confirmed it was a congenital birth defect, which is a fancy way of saying they didn't know what caused it. My parents took me home, filled with overwhelming love and anxious sorrow. At the primary school where he was deputy head, Dad found himself repeating, "He's a lovely baby boy," but to a stream of colleagues expecting happy news. Mum was a classroom teacher at the same school. They didn't want the whole thing to be about the hand, but as for me, I fitted right in. Newborn babies can't do much, however many hands they have. We lived in Banstead, Surrey, in a steep row of semi-detached houses with tight little porches and bay windows. Our cortina sat out front on the crazy paving. My awareness grew from the milky, undefined realm of supermarket trolley seat and playpen to include reference to a little hand, which accompanied my journeys around the house. I expected to see it there, not realizing it was different or any less than a person might want, even though my younger sister had popped out with 2. My little hand became part of the family, a feature like Dad's chin dimple, which I could poke through his beard, or Mum's long dark hair, which was hard to straighten, or our Labrador's big brown nose. In truth, little hand overstates things a bit. There are small nodes across where the knuckles would have been, but these are only fingers in an archaeological sense, like the worn-away remnants of an Iron Age fort. Stump would be more accurate, but who the hell wants a stump? That's where I started the story.
I think it's lovely hearing that, because I think it really evokes the sort of childhood innocence, though, where you sort of start off life with not really, you don't know any sort of problem, do you? Sort of, it's just you're kind of born, and then you have a body, and you're a child, and you have that sort of innocence about you.
Yeah.
I suppose I'm sort of curious. I know that this arises slightly later in the book. In a way, I'm interested in sort of, I'm interested in when did you realize that it was a sort of problem as such? When was that point in your life?
Yeah, you're right. In a way, sometimes you could say you've never lost a hand.
No.
Because you didn't have one. So what have you exactly lost? But so you don't grow up with that. You just deal with what you've got, don't you? Generally, and I think my parents treated it like, and very well. They treated it as a thing that you could get around by making adjustments. We had, the classic thing is how you're going to eat your dinner without a knife and a fork. And there's various ways around that. I had a knife that is a fork and a spoon, all on one side. Somebody made that for me. It didn't work as a knife or a fork or a spoon, but it was a nice try. My dad made adjustments. My mum cut all the holes, cut the fingers off the gloves and sewed over the holes. Switched around the brake cable so I didn't flip over. I mean, you can do all these things, and they're loving things to do for a child. But of course, I guess my parents were aware that it wasn't a problem on a different level as well. But their thing was, for me, was get out there and you're just as good as everyone else. Just get on, and it's fine. There's nothing, in a sense, there's nothing to see here. We're all in ourselves, in our own minds. We're all complete, aren't we? We're all no different from each other ultimately. And that was the message that I think is a very good message. But when I was 8, to answer your question, I think I was about 8 or maybe 9. I remember going to school one day, and it was a period when I was getting ostracized from the group that I wanted to be in. Looking back, heaven knows why I wanted to be in that group with those miserables. But I did. It was like I couldn't think of being in any other group, any other gang. That was the one. But I was regularly ostracized and bullied. But I do remember that moment. I think it's at 8 is an age when your consciousness starts to emerge in new ways, doesn't it? You become much more aware of yourself as an individual, and 7, 8. And I remember that heavy feeling. It was like a particular moment when I realized this was a problem that wasn't going to go away. Well, I couldn't solve it. There was no way out. Being 8, I had no consciousness of, that things would change in the future. Everything looked a bit bleak, really. And I think I had it internally bleak. I couldn't share it with my parents because I could have done, but I didn't, and they didn't invite that. And I don't know, it just wasn't picked up on by anybody. And I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to make it more of a problem than it already was. I could manage the problem with the kids. It was in the school playground. When I went home, it was fine. So I didn't want it escalating out of that, and I didn't speak about it. So it was a kind of a heavy thing, that feeling I can't change this. I'm just going to have to swallow it.
Because I'm quite interested in if you can't solve, because in a way, you evoked it very beautifully there, where it's always the shoelaces, I think, that people are amazed by, that you can tie your shoelaces with one hand. It's a thing. And you can solve all of those things, but you can't solve that thing on those terms. It's like you need something else, don't you? You need to I sort of think that it's somewhat existential. You need to call upon something else, because your behavior is going to sort of adjust to meet those social pressures, isn't it? I know with myself that for me, I eventually tried to play big. So I think you can, in those sort of scenarios, you either play small or you play big. So I tried to just get really aggressive, which is what has shaped quite a lot of my life in some ways. Or you can play small, and that's another way of sort of adjusting things. But there is something of eventually you've got to ask yourself, why on earth have I got this? What have I, in a way, I remember asking myself, like, what have I done to do sort of deserve this? Like, what you know, and trying to sort of ask myself, like, why?
Yeah.
You know, why? And well, there is no. I mean, I don't know if you have anything to say with that, but
Well, I don't know if I have ever asked myself why. I remember. I mean, this is sort of skipping ahead a bit in the story. I did end up kind of going on a camp when I was in my 30s, my late 20s, with children who had. So I moved into a Buddhist community when I was in my sort of 20s, and I lived there for a long time. And I remember one occasion when I went on the tube, and I had one of these moments that you're talking about, seeing a guy got on around the back bank station, and he looked like a city kind of person, and he had a very similar thing to me, and I had this instinct to hide and get away from him. I had a book in my hand, as you do on the tube, and I sort of went like that. My instinct probably was to play small, actually, or play clever and small. Try to beat people by being cleverer, a bit quicker, smarter, and but generally I wasn't on the aggressive side. I would be more like, on this kind of hide a bit side, and kind of try and make out that it's not a thing through my teenage years. But when I got to sort of in my 20s, I had that realization. I've been doing meditation, I've been practicing Buddhism, but I hadn't really brought that into the field of my awareness. Why did I feel this discomfort here? And, I mean, we can talk about this later, but anyway, I did some camps for children with, all had this similar thing, either one or no hands, and all the adult helpers. But one of the things, what I was going to say was, I saw these boys who had a lot of sort of inner frustration and kind of rage. Like we've been given this body, and it's pretty good in many ways, and you just want to get on and play football and be part of things or do your thing, and it just doesn't. You're being thwarted by this thing that's in your. And I guess we all have these things in our minds, in some ways, or in our bodies, or in the conditions of our lives that stops us being something, and that is very, very clear in the image of. In the book, it's sort of an image of dukkha, as we say in Buddhism, an image of unsatisfactoriness. But yeah, so going back to what you were saying, I don't know whether I asked myself why, but I suppose that was an implicit question in my mind, was I wish this were not so, but for this being the case, I could be happy or something.
That's very interesting. There's lots of threads spinning off.
Sorry,
that,
spin away.
In a way, you touched upon the Buddhist community, which is sort of another point that we wanted to get to, and I think I can find a way of sort of segueing into that. And I suppose, I mean, in the book, I mean, one would think that the sort of natural segue onto this would be like, oh, the suffering that I experienced from my arm, I looked for religion, or I looked for Buddhism. But you didn't go towards Buddhism for that explicitly as such. You were very into the Dharma, weren't you? And you really sort of clicked with the Dharma. And maybe you can talk about first encountering the Three Jewels or the Buddhist Center.
We have gone around. I mean, I'd like to backpedal as well to that being a teenager moment when going to parties, going to this kind of feeling of being separate from the world, but separated through this thing. But I'm not talking about it, and I'm not inviting anybody else to talk about it. And I'd spend years would pass without anybody really mentioning it to me. I don't know whether this is
no, people just don't. They don't ask.
They
really
ask.
Want to, but they don't.
They really want to. I had a friend once who did ask me, and then immediately all the other people gathered round to hear what my answer was. And how did that happen? And there were obviously, a lot of them were embarrassed that they hadn't ever asked before, because after you've known someone for a while, it sort of becomes a bit embarrassing to even broach a topic that really you could have got out of the way in the first 10 minutes. But there's English politeness in there. But there's also the way that one tends to invite people in or not. It's sort of like the way that one behaves and acts tends to then have very subtle but real effects on people in the way that they feel invited to ask those questions or inquire. But I definitely didn't. And I think so that's relevant because as I went into university, so I studied law at Oxford. I thought that would be the answer to my conundrum in a way. If I could, surely the girls would definitely fancy me despite having one hand if I was the lawyer at Oxford. That was the kind of thinking. It's not very deep, is it? I went on my first meditation retreat when I was at Oxford, and it was one of those free Vipassana retreats. And there's a whole backstory here I could talk about with my family and my grandfather's influence on me. And he was into Buddhism and Zen Buddhism, and I did get a little bit of a sense of Buddhism through my family. But really, I went on the retreat because I felt life was I felt okay. I didn't feel like I was really suffering, or I was, if you'd have asked me why I was going on the retreat, I said, it's free. I want to go on it. I want to check it out. I'm interested in meditation. And that was all true. And, but when I got on the retreat, for the first time in my life, I was in a place, there was a situation where I was being encouraged and facilitated in a way and directed to look at my mind and just to not be a total victim to everything that went through my mind. And this had a profound effect. It was one of these Vipassana retreats, which was 10 days of very rigorous sitting. It hurts. It's agonizing. And at the end, everybody just compares how agonizing it was. You're not allowed to speak. You're not allowed to look at other people. It's very, it's not quite like the way we do things in Triratna, but it is effective in a certain way. And I felt like I kind of burst through a certain layer of that feeling of disconnection through that practice. So there is a direct correlation between how I was and when I started to meditate. But I didn't, at that time, relate it to my suffering being to do with my hand. Exactly. It was all too unconscious. It was all too sort of in the nether regions of my mind. Not something I would want to sort of admit. Especially when I got involved in Buddhism, I was just excited by Buddhist philosophy. I was, and I didn't want this hand thing.
I can relate to that a lot actually, because in very similar ways I came to the center because I wanted to work with my mind, because I was just got erratic and just mood swingy. I wasn't thinking of anything in terms of trying to get a better grasp of the situation with my arm as such, but it was sort of, I remember, many of you will remember Satyanama. He pointed out to me once, we were on the international gathering, I just asked for ordination, so I think he started to take me a little bit more seriously at that point. And he said to me, he's like, you always got your sleeve down when you go and bow to the shrine. What's that all about? And I was like, oh gosh, I've been caught. Yeah. It's I thought anyone had the courage to sort of ask me that before. And it wasn't sort of I'd made it, I had made a conscious decision that I wasn't going to sort of show myself in a particular way. Or at least that was sort of baggage from before. I never used to wear short sleeve t-shirts. I didn't roll it up. I just let my sleeve hang down, which is arguably looked weirder than if you just roll it up.
Definitely.
But anyway, because people are just sort of what? Has he broken his arm? Has he got it in his sling? What's good? Anyway, so there was something around. I'm actually really grateful for him. I mean, that was quite a leap of courage he had, and to sort of call me out on that, and I mean, to be honest, I have a very competitive background. I used to race motorcycles, so if someone challenges me to something, I can generally get very motivated. Right? If I just have to do it, then it's sort of. But if you're just Zac, I'll challenge you to sort of, bow to the shrine with your t-shirt on, I was like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll prove you wrong or something like that. Yeah. So it's just an insight into my mind. And I suppose that sort of, in a way, Well, we're back onto that area of friendship, and there's a bit in the book that I remember. I think it's Maitreya Bandhu. He asks you. He says, "Do you sort of think that? Do you think the arm's got anything to do with this?" So I think you were experiencing some emotional difficulty. I mean, you were in community at that point.
Yes.
And you were in community for a number of years, weren't you?
Yes.
And that was all going. I wonder if you remember anything from that, or maybe you could even say something about Maitreya Bandhu and living in the community in the LBC.
Yeah, well, yeah, I can. I can say, when I was 23, I moved into the London Buddhist Centre, a men's community, so it was just men living above the London Buddhist Centre, and there's a women's community just down the road. And I lived there for 6 years. I didn't plan to live there for 6 years when I moved in, but I loved it. I had done and partly, what I'm trying to do in this book is to sort of describe my journey, because it's a journey that so many people I've known have done. The book isn't all about the hand, and all that paradox of whether it's about the hand or whether it's not about the hand is an open question. Are we caused by the conditions of our lives, or is it how we meet the conditions of our lives that is the most significant thing? And what's that determined by? So yeah, but I loved living in the community. I went on sort of a retreat with Maitreya Bandhu when I was 22, and others, and I was completely captivated by it. We have this experience, many people, and I certainly had it. There's nothing in my culture and my upbringing which prepared me for the uplifted sense of life and imagination, and call it the Buddha, whatever that is. There's nothing that prepared me for that sense of an uplifted vision for life that I found when I went on retreat with others in the Sangha. There was no prelude to that. It didn't exist in my culture, which was a good culture. There was nothing, essentially wrong with it. I had a very lovely upbringing, a happy childhood in many ways, but it didn't contain anything that I sort of started to find. And I wanted to sort of honor that in the book by showing how that unfolds. And one of the things we often say in Triratna, and certainly we said it a lot back then, this was late 90s, was, if you get involved, if you find something that's of significance, try and make it more part of your life. Try to make it part of your everyday life, and live in a community with other practitioners, work in a business with others. And so I thought, yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I'll do that. And I threw myself into it, and I couldn't bear working in some of the whole food shops that we had. It was just too. I've been trained as an Oxford lawyer, and I was moving around pots of, yeast extract or whatever, and I couldn't do it. So I retrained as a journalist and started to do that. I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I was living at the Buddhist Centre, and I loved it. The life that we had there, it answered so many of those deep kind of questions, or at least it appeased that feeling. What about my career? Who am I? What am I doing in my life? What's this, all those kinds of questions that haunt so many years of one's life. There I was, living in a community. We got up in the morning, we meditated together, we ate together. Yeah, we went out and did our jobs, but there was a sort of circularity to life. There was this feeling of being connected to an ancient tradition that was being expressed in this modern form that was really, really amazing. So I want to honor that and say that is, that was great. And all through my time in the community, that was there. But where did that, I also wanted to show that things got difficult within that. And Maitreya Bandhu was one of those people who, like you're saying with Satyanama, but he was one of those people who was brave enough to point things out. Not necessarily about my hand. It might be about my tendency to, be very sharp with my arguments and defensive, because I developed a kind of sense of being a bit defended, overly defended. Yeah.
So this is a sort of area that I was quite interested in as well, because you speak quite openly about doubt in the book, which was quite refreshing for me. So it's not something that I very good at admitting, of having doubt, and I don't know if we're that great at it. I don't know, I'll speak too generally there, but it's sort of like we don't necessarily talk that openly about our doubts and our resistances. And I'm curious to know, well, at what point did you start to experience doubts, and what were they connected with, you know?
So I was living in the community, and I was a young guy, I was 25 years old, say, and when you're, you know, I was steeped in Buddhism. I was sort of studying it. I was going on more retreats, and I was looking at the older people in the community who are now probably younger than I am now. You know, I'm 47, but there was people in the community who were 35, 40, 45, and their lives seemed to consist of going on more and more retreats, not earning much money, not having very much in the way of sex or romantic relationships, or somehow, you know, they were not that important. But like, I did want those things, actually. Like, I actually wanted romance. I was like, bloody hell, why did I have to get involved in Buddhism so young? You know, I wanted to go and have, because we used to tell our life stories, and mine was just rubbish. It was so short. And then I moved into a Buddhist community. I wanted a more torrid life behind me, and I didn't have it. And so these different, like, competing myths, if you like, of life, you know, some of them were like all those things that I thought were appeased by being a Buddhist and having, you know, this meditation practice and all this wonderful community. Some of the stuff that I thought was appeased was really still there. It was like I'd set my life up to be a lawyer, you know, and a successful, earn money, you know, accumulate and all that kind of stuff. But really, that was there. But more, it was like, you know, romance, you know, and I didn't think in terms of marriage or children particularly at that time. But yeah, so there was a kind of, well, where's this? Well, how does this fit into this picture of meditation and awakening, and you know, how does that all fit in? It doesn't seem to fit in very well, and you know, those kind of just also, you know, desire for money, but be a bit more independent. I was working at the Buddhist center, so I had to, you know, often had to ask for money when I wanted to do stuff, and I hated that. So, you know, all those growing up things so that's on one level, just that's where doubt started to emerge. Do I really want to do this? I've been shown this really strong vision of life, you know, that you get through Buddhism. But do I really want to do that? And how can I do both? So it's kind of work out how to do both. But then you end up spending, I joke in the book that it's quite hard to lead a full-on sort of romantic life and meditate in the mornings, early in the mornings and stuff. It's you're riding two quite different horses. Anyway, I couldn't work it all out. And yeah, that's one level. And then on another level of doubt would be sort of more kind of like, do I really believe in all of this? You know, do I really, how would I put it? It used to manifest most strongly when we did pujas, which, if you don't know, is kind of, you know, like worship, these verses of worship. The Buddha figures, they would be quite alien sort of figures to me in some ways, although not as well. It's like this double thing. Yeah, I know what a Buddha figure is. I know what I'm doing with bowing to a shrine. I kind of know, but that would evoke in me a deep sense of, well, am I really going to give my life to this? You know, do I really believe it that much? Yeah, so that was all there, that all those levels of doubt, which led me after a few years, maybe after, say, 4 or 5 years of living in a community and, you know, to feel quite conflicted, quite depressed, actually quite miserable at times, which wasn't what I had expected as a general trajectory I had expected. Because you have these wonderful experiences when you start meditating, and you sort of envisage them going on and up, and you get a bit shinier, and people like you a bit more, and then it's a bit indistinct, isn't it, when you think about our future? But it wasn't really working out. I was actually, and then because I was a bit unhappy, that was upsetting my friendships with people. I was if you like, externalizing my conflicts into friendships, and being a bit of a misery guts probably to people, really. Yeah.
I'm aware of time, so we'll start. Maybe we'll just go over by like 5 minutes, and then we'll make it up elsewhere.
Sure.
But
can I borrow some of your water?
Go for it.
Thanks.
Sorry. Good. You've distracted me, and I've lost my train of thought now. That's fine. So at some point, those doubts became sufficient enough for you. Well, so you'd asked for ordination somewhere along the lines of that journey, and somewhere along those doubts got sufficient enough, or that frustration got sufficient enough for you to withdraw your ordination request, and you decided at that point that you were going to go do something else. You'd kind of had enough at that point. You had enough of it all, and you were going to do something else. Without giving too much of the book away in some ways, so I'm also quite interested as that then when you came back and you did get ordained, because I know there was some frustration. You were like, why wouldn't they ordain me? I'm doing all of this stuff, and then you had that moment, you came back, and then it seemed like you came back in a different way. And I'm curious, obviously that led to ordination. I'm curious to know what was going on there at that time.
Yeah. What can I say about that? Many of us, many people I've known, you move into a community, you start practicing with a group, with a sangha, you go on retreats, and then this conflict arises. It might arise sooner, it might arise later. For some people, I'm not speaking for everyone. Some people it manifests in different ways, and people come into this thing we call Dharma practice at all sorts of different levels, from all sorts of different places. But very often there is a kind of conflict, and for me, I guess I had built my sense of my identity around, and I'd asked for ordination, so I'd placed my highest aspiration, such as it was, the highest thing that I could imagine was somehow involved in this community, and not just this community, the London Buddhist Centre actually, and my connections with some people, and that was where I imagined this precious thing called spiritual practice, spiritual life, Dharma life, which I felt cut off from. I thought, these guys are the real spiritual characters. I can't do it. I can't change. It's probably going back to that thing in the school playground, really. I can't change, really. I don't really want to. So I had to. It's very painful. I didn't decide. So the other thing that was going on at this time, actually, and what I've tried to describe in the book, grandly speaking, what I've tried to describe in this book is through my grandfather and through my family. And my grandfather met Sangharakshita in the 60s, and that's the story in the book. And he met my mum, and I didn't even know about this till I was a mitra. There's a whole story there. But I've tried to describe through my family story and through my story and my friends and the people I've known, the whole sort of journey, this wonderful opening of Western Dharma, at least within this community. And so when I just got distracted there because I realized I was gesticulating with my hand, and that's in the book as well. You got a stump and you still got to gesticulate with your hand. It's all weird. And so what was happening at that time, which was early part of this century, sort of 2000 to 2004, the whole of our order and our movement was undergoing something of a very difficult time. A lot of inwards sort of soul searching about many things, at least one of those things was, does this really work? People who devoted their lives to Dharma practice, lived in communities, had eschewed families, hadn't had children, hadn't built their careers, there was quite a lot of doubt emerged. The doubt particularized, crystallized around doubt maybe about the community or Sangharakshita, the founder, and his role and what he got up to and or didn't get up to, or, has anybody really got what we call insight? All those questions, they were all being asked quite insistently at that time. So I was in that milieu. This was at this same time that I was having those doubts, and there's probably no coincidence there. And it was a very painful time for people. It's painful to regret things, isn't it? It's really painful. It's one of the hardest probably not. It's a hard feeling to feel regret. What have you done? But it's a human feeling. It's a really human experience, and people experience that in connection with Dharma practice as well, and with living in communities and doing all these things. You can experience those things. You're not immune from all of that human life. And people went other ways and left the order, or some. Very, very many people didn't, and it's remarkable, really, the order for its longevity of people in it. But I decided I had to leave. I felt like I was sort of betraying something precious that I'd been given. It all sounds rather dramatic, doesn't it? But that was a feeling that arose, that feeling of like leaving great friends. I moved in with my girlfriend, and who is now my wife. And I became a lawyer. Wow, that was the last thing. I felt like I was going the wrong way. You're supposed to be a lawyer for 30 years and then have some spiritual realization. There I was, ploughing backwards in the other direction, trying to sort of earn a living and retrain. But I never in my heart felt like I had rejected not Buddhism, and not even this community. I was just sort of feeling the love that I had for it wasn't there. It was like going into a long period of not feeling the glove very cleanly or at all. But there was something there. There was still an undercurrent. So I then came back to the Buddhist Center, and I patched up my friendships with some people over many years. Slowly things changed, and I of course, coming back, I came back with more independence in an ordinary sense, and having got a bit older, and all of that growing up. And one of the amazing things is that people come into Dharma practice young. Some people, and I was one of them. And you have to live your whole life as well. You have to grow up. And you change as you get older. And you change in all sorts of ways that you never thought you would, of course, and that's completely normal, and that's what happens. So I just stuck around. I used to play rugby, and one of my specialities was never letting go of the ball. And they used to, tenacious. They used to call me the terrier or the teddy bear, because people just hang on to me while I was running down the pitch. I wouldn't just let go of that bloody ball. And in a way, I just sort of kept coming back. It's a bit of that sense of, well, I've got to. And I got to a point with doubt where my doubt was, I just doubted my doubt. Like if you're really thoroughgoing doubt type, you end up thinking, this can't be quite right, can it? It can't really be like that. This must have something to do with me. It must be something to do with me, that nagging thought. I doubted my doubt. And in the end, I kind of I had this moment where I let go of a kind of the feeling of the need to resolve things in such a way, to be clear, to have either this or that. We're all unique. We're all got our whole conditions, and there's this wonderful current that I've been invited into, this current of Dharma practice, that I really did respond to. Whatever I said about it at times, and however much I kind of wished, I thought my life would be easier if I didn't have this. We've spoken a bit about this, haven't we?
Yeah.
But like, just trusting that current and saying, yeah, let's just see where it takes me. It's not the end of the. It's not the biggest deal in the world whether I get ordained or don't ordained. You know, it's a current that I can trust and see where we get to next, because there's far more than getting ordained.
Wow, that's very rich. There's even more that we probably could talk about, but I'm aware that we've gone over by time a little bit. Just to sort of end, I just think that there's such value. I'm going back in a way to the fact that you wrote a memoir. I think there's such value in hearing a Buddhist life, specifically someone that, you know, someone that's a Western Buddhist. You know, you are someone that's been, you are ordained here, and we don't necessarily hear, or I haven't encountered that many lives of people in the order, actually. I think that there's something really valuable in that, because most of the time you hear memoirs from, you know, sort of lamas in mountains, and we have Sangharakshita, obviously, which is a very beautiful story. But I think there's something really valuable in that, because I think like we need to see what it looks like. Something about being able to see what a life looks like committed to the Dharma.
Yeah, and
that can look so many different ways.
That's right. Yeah, and one of the wonderful things about memoirs, you know, we've all read memoirs. You walk alongside someone's life, and you feel it to be your life in a certain kind of way. I read a book about a surfer recently called The Surfer's Life, funny enough, or Barbarian Days. Fantastic. I mean, I felt like I was with him surfing. I've never surfed, and I'm never going to now. But you're invited in, and you live that life with someone, and that's an amazing thing. And through the personal, the universal is there in some way, and that's kind of what I've hoped. Yeah.
Well, if that's not a good point to end on, I don't know what is. I wonder if we just give a quick round of applause to Satyadasa. Good. So we'll take about a 15-minute tea break, and that'll be